Congratulations are surely in order for the Hyundai Ioniq 6, which just got its official EPA range estimate, and it beat out the long-range Model 3, which was already an insanely good range for the price. And while we don't have concrete numbers on the Ioniq 6 pricing yet, this will likely be sub $55,000 for the single-motor rear-wheel drive variant, clocking in 361 miles of estimated range, which is just fantastic. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that Hyundai with their GMP platform is beating out Tesla efficiency, because in order to get 361 miles of range they had to go with a rear-wheel drive single motor variant, which Tesla doesn't actually have a long-range single motor Model 3 anymore. They used to, but I get the feeling if they made one today it would probably beat out the Ioniq 6, but for whatever reason Tesla decides they don't want to do that because all-wheel drive is too important. But either way, I'm still excited and happy to see the non-Tesla EVs break the 350 mile range barrier and still keep the price, sub $60,000. It's one thing to make a 400, 500 mile range EV like Lucid, but it costs $130,000 to $150,000. Now it's just mostly flexing when you're in that price category. But when you're making a, under $55,000 EV, so it's a lot more approachable and a lot more reasonable, and it's over 350 miles of range, now we're getting somewhere. That's pretty interesting. And the reason I'm more excited about the Ioniq 6 than really any other, six-figure EV out there is the efficiency. I've always said on my channel that's kind of the driving focus I have with electric vehicles, is how little energy they consume, and that's why I want more vehicles like the Ioniq 6 and less like the Hummer EV, because this is just a classic example of how two different companies are handling the EV transition, and there's a right way to do it, and in my opinion there's a very wrong way to do it. And the Hummer EV is all of the encompassing ideas done poorly. Like, basically, for every Hummer EV that is made, they have to pack in 215 kilowatt hours worth of battery packs, and that gets it a little over 300 miles of range. Whereas the Ioniq 6, much more efficient vehicle, very aerodynamic, and the design, it's not my favorite. They seem to have this big focus on pixelation with the Ioniq series. It makes it stand out. Some people like it, some people don't, but that's all personal preference. That's all subjective. What is not subjective is efficiency numbers, and the Ioniq 6 is getting over 350 miles of range with a sub 78 kilowatt hour battery pack, which, yes, that does mean that basically you're using 3 Ioniq 6 battery packs for every Hummer EV to go the same distance. And I know that most people are probably thinking, well, Drew, it's a pickup truck and the Hummer has never been about efficiency, but here's my kind of tangent on that. Like, the whole reason we're switching vehicles to electric is because they're more efficient. It's because it's better for the environment. Regardless of if it's a combustion engine, a hydrogen fuel cell, or a battery pack, the point is EVs use less energy per mile. So when you start out your EV transition by making the most inefficient one possible, you're kind of defeating a lot of the purpose of switching to electric in the first place. And I know that there's going to be some gas guzzlers or some hyper Hummer fanboys out there that really like the Hummer EV, and I'm not saying all those Hummer EV buyers should instead buy the Ioniq 6. I get it. It's a totally different market, but our biggest issues right now preventing EV adoption, I've said this many times before, is not desirability of the product. It is not a demand issue. It's everything to do with cost and availability. I can't tell you how many times I've shown off my Tesla to someone or shown off other EVs to different people, and they say, that's the kind of EV I want, that's the one I want to buy, but they just can't afford it, or the one they want is limited in availability because companies can't build them fast enough, and dealers apply these huge markups to them, and increasing availability of EVs will make them more affordable and will let more people buy them. So that's why I want more Ioniq 6s on the road, because these require a fraction of the cells that the Hummer EV does, and there's a huge market for it. There are tons of people that want to buy 4-door, 5-seater sedans, because sedans are awesome, but typically the biggest issue preventing EV adoption is not, oh, I want a big fat Hummer EV with 3 windshield wipers and crab walk. No, the people that want to make the switch to electric are scared about range and they're scared about cost and that break-even point of when is buying an EV going to make more financial sense than buying a gas car. And vehicles like the Ioniq 6, because of their lower price point, appeal to a much wider demographic. And hey, for a third of the battery cells as a Hummer EV and also a third of the motors, that's right, a Hummer has 3 electric motors. The Ioniq 6, the one I'm referring to, has 1 motor. They have all-wheel drive variants that aren't as good, but my guess is not that many people will want to opt for them in the first place because the single motor has just such insanely good range. And that means with the same number of cells and the same number of motors and everything, you can sell like 3 Ioniq 6s and make $150,000 worth of revenue versus 1 Hummer EV, which is going to take just as many cells, just as many motors, plus have all the extra complexities of a Hummer, and you only get to charge $100,000 in revenue for that one. So basically, I think Hyundai is much more serious about electric vehicles than General Motors is at this point, because the Ioniq 6 will still support DC fast charging at much higher speeds than the Chevy Bolt does, and even the Chevy Blazer, which hasn't come out yet. My only suggestion to the Ioniq 6 that I would love to see them do is adopt the NACS connector and ditch this dated CCS design, because the network for CCS is crumbling in the United States, and the port is so big and so bulky, and Tesla's willing to open up the supercharger network for lots of places in Europe and Australia, around the world, assuming you have the same connector as the superchargers, and superchargers far outweigh the number of Electrify America stations, and they're not very good anyway. So for new EVs, I would love if they could just get on board with the NACS connector. So if you had a 360-mile range EV that had supercharging access, not made by Tesla with their more questionable build quality and choice of materials, yeah, you're gonna have an absolute killer of a product on your hands. And that's why I admire the Ioniq 6 for their aerodynamics, and I'm sure the interior is a lot what people are looking for. You know, biggest criticisms people have with Tesla is the lack of CarPlay or Android Auto, and the Ioniq 6 has those types of things. So for the more traditional car buyer, this is perfect, this is great. I'm all in favor of Tesla competitors or Tesla alternatives, whatever you want to call them, because I don't think any of them are really a threat to Tesla, at least as long as they're using CCS. But options are good. You know, you drive around on city streets, you see how many different makes and brands of car there are. It's because people have varying different kinds of preferences and biases when it comes to what type of vehicle they like in terms of the design, the features, the efficiency. So it's okay for there to be options outside of Tesla. Some of these Super Bowls are convinced that there can only be Teslas, but making more vehicles like the Ioniq 6 is how you best compete with Tesla. And if you have to rely on Electrify America, then I guess having the longest range EV possible is the best way to ensure you don't have to stop as frequently on those long road trips. And I just think it's a shame that we talk so much about Lucid all the time and not enough about these cheaper EVs with great efficiency and great range. This is exactly the type of vehicle that I feel like Lucid should be making, you know? A 75 kilowatt hour battery pack that can go 350 miles on a charge. Way smarter than a 120 kilowatt hour battery pack that can go 500 miles of range on a charge. So good job, Hyundai. I can't wait to check out the Ioniq 6 in person, hopefully later this year. And let me know what you guys think of the Ioniq 6 versus the Hummer EV down in the comments below. And thank you to everybody supporting this channel directly. Seriously, helps us out a ton, as does just watching these videos. So thanks again. Have an excellent rest of your day.